I'm Audrey, 32 female. I live in a quiet apartment that overlooks the city, a small sanctuary from the controlled chaos of my professional life as a neurosurgeon. My life is a carefully constructed balance of high-stakes surgeries, research, and the precious, quiet moments I carve out for myself. It's a life I built deliberately, brick by painful brick, far from the suffocating judgment of my extended family. But a single invitation was about to threaten that peace, forcing me to confront the very people I had spent a decade trying to escape. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Chapter 1: The Invitation. The invitation arrived not as a crisp piece of cardstock in the mail, but as a digital summons on a Tuesday morning. It was a group text from my cousin, Chloe, a bubbly, pastel-drenched notification accompanied by a dozen emojis. Family reunion and engagement bash. It screamed in a font that hurt my eyes. Celebrating me and my amazing fiancé, Liam. Grandma Aliner's house this Saturday. Be there. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. A family reunion. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. For the last 10 years, I had successfully avoided these gatherings, citing the brutal and unpredictable schedule of a surgical resident and then a fellow. It wasn't a lie, my life was genuinely demanding, but it was also a convenient, unimpeachable shield. It protected me from the person I dreaded seeing most, Chloe's mother, my Aunt Susan. Aunt Susan was a woman sculpted from disapproval and hairspray. A successful real estate agent in their suburban town, she measured worth in square footage, luxury car brands, and the perceived success of one's children. My mother, her younger sister, had been a librarian, a gentle soul who valued books over bank statements. When my parents passed away in a car accident when I was 18, Aunt Susan had taken me in. A duty she performed with the grudging air of someone saddled with a poor investment. My grief was an inconvenience to her. My desire to pursue medicine, a field that required years of thankless, low-paying training, was an outright personal offense. "Why would you waste your youth and looks being poor?" she'd asked me once, her lips thin with disdain. "You could marry well. Chloe knows that. You should be more like Chloe." Chloe, her pride and joy, had always been groomed for a life of curated perfection. While I was dissecting frogs in biology lab, she was practicing her pageant wave. While I was buried in organic chemistry textbooks, she was building a social media following based on her aspirational lifestyle. She wasn't unkind, not actively, but she was a product of her mother's values, superficial, image-obsessed, and blissfully unaware of any world outside her own. I had loved my Grandma Aliner fiercely, but visiting her meant running the gauntlet of Susan's judgment. So I kept my distance, sending flowers, calling weekly, but always having a neurosurgical emergency whenever a family event loomed. But this time felt different. Grandma Aliner had called me the night before the text arrived. Her voice, usually a warm, steady comfort, had a fragile tremor. "Audrey, dear," she'd said, "I know you're busy, the busiest girl in the world, and I'm so proud, but it's been so long. This party for Chloe, it would mean the world to an old woman to see your face." How could I say no to that? The guilt was a physical weight. My grandmother had been my rock after my parents died, the one person who saw my ambition not as a flaw, but as a fire to be nurtured. She'd slip me $20 bills for pizza during late-night study sessions in college and send me care packages filled with her famous oatmeal cookies during my residency. I owed her this. I could endure a few hours of Aunt Susan for Grandma Aliner. So, with a deep sigh that seemed to draw up a decade of resentment, I typed a reply to Chloe's text. "Wouldn't miss it. See you Saturday." The week leading up to the party was brutal. I had a marathon 14-hour surgery on Wednesday to resect a particularly nasty glioblastoma. The patient was a man younger than me, a father of two. The pressure was immense, a delicate dance on the knife edge of life and death. We got the tumor, a clean resection, but the emotional and physical toll was immense. I spent the next 2 days catching up on paperwork, doing rounds, and feeling the deep, bone-weary exhaustion that only surgeons know. By Saturday morning, I was running on caffeine and sheer willpower. I looked at my closet, a collection of practical, comfortable scrubs, lab coats, and a few simple dresses for the rare occasions I went out. There was nothing that would satisfy Aunt Susan's criteria for presentable. In her world, you were either a walking bill, bored for your wealth, or you were invisible. I remembered a conversation from years ago. I just started my residency, working 80-hour weeks for a salary that barely covered my rent and student loan payments. I'd made the mistake of showing up to a Christmas dinner in my hospital-issued scrubs because I hadn't had time to go home and change. Aunt Susan had cornered me by the dessert table. "Audrey, you simply must make an effort," she'd hissed, gesturing at my clothes with a perfectly manicured hand. "People will think we don't take care of you. It looks like you clean the hospital floors for a living, not whatever it is you do there." The memory still stung. Whatever it is you do there. She had no concept, no desire to understand the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the crushing debt, the sheer intellectual and emotional fortitude it took to cut into a human brain and save a life. To her, I was just her poor, unfortunate niece who played with scalpels instead of Tiffany bracelets. An idea, small and rebellious, began to form in my mind. She thought I cleaned toilets? Fine. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me in a designer dress. I wouldn't even wear my simple, professional attire. I would give her exactly the version of me she'd created in her head. I drove to a uniform supply store that morning. The place smelled of antiseptic and stiff, new fabric. I found what I was looking for in the janitorial section, a pair of plain, gray, utility work pants and a matching button-up shirt. They were clean, functional, and utterly devoid of any style or status. I bought them, along with a pair of steel-toed work boots. Getting ready that afternoon felt like putting on a costume for a play I didn't want to be in. The fabric was starchy and impersonal. I pulled my long hair back into a severe, functional bun, the kind you wear when you don't want anything getting in your way. I wore no makeup. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger. I saw the person my aunt saw, a menial laborer, weary and insignificant, a ghost. The drive to my grandmother's house was a journey back in time. The highways of the city gave way to the winding, tree-lined streets of the suburbs. Each familiar landmark was a reminder of a life I had shed. There was the park, where my dad taught me to ride a bike, the library my mom had managed for 20 years, the high school where I'd been a quiet, nerdy girl with impossible dreams. Pulling up to Grandma Aliner's house, my resolve wavered. The lawn was immaculately manicured, and a professionally made banner reading "Chloe and Liam, engaged," was strung between two old oak trees. Dozens of expensive cars lined the street, Mercedes, BMWs, a Porsche. It was a showcase of the life Aunt Susan worshipped. Through the large bay window, I could see a crowd of people, all dressed in their Saturday best. Floral dresses, crisp linen shirts, sparkling jewelry. They were laughing, holding glasses of champagne, their faces alight with the easy confidence of the comfortable. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was about to walk into the lion's den wearing a sheep's costume. No, not a sheep. I was the wolf, but I had chosen to dress as the janitor. I took one last, deep breath, my hand on the car door handle. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and impending judgment. It was time. For Grandma Aliner, I reminded myself, I could do this for her. I got out of the car and walked towards the front door, each step feeling heavier than the last, preparing myself for the impact of my aunt's inevitable scorn. Chapter 2: The Humiliation. The moment I stepped through the front door, the cheerful cacophony of the party seemed to dip in volume, as if a conductor had momentarily lowered his baton. A few heads turned, their expressions shifting from polite interest to thinly veiled confusion. I was an anomaly, a gray smudge on a vibrant canvas of suburban affluence. I could feel their eyes cataloging my drab uniform, my severe hair, my makeup-free face. The judgment was instantaneous and palpable. I spotted my Grandma Aliner across the room, seated in her favorite armchair, looking regal even in the midst of the chaos. Her face lit up when she saw me, a beacon of pure, unconditional love in a sea of confused faces. I started to make my way toward her, but a perfectly manicured hand shot out and gripped my arm, halting my progress. "Audrey, is that you?" I turned to face my Aunt Susan. She was dressed in a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection, and her makeup was a masterclass in concealing any sign of genuine human emotion. Her eyes, however, did not conceal her horror. They swept over my janitorial uniform, from the collar of my shirt down to the steel-toed boots, and a look of profound, theatrical embarrassment washed over her face. "What in God's name are you wearing?" she hissed, her voice a low, urgent whisper designed not to carry, but still sharp enough to cut. "Did your car break down? Did you have to come straight from whatever that is?" "Hello, Aunt Susan," I said, my voice even. "I came from home. These are my clothes." Her perfectly painted lips pursed into a thin line of disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't wear that here. This is a party. For Chloe, there are important people here." She gestured vaguely at the crowd, as if they were all judges in the court of her social standing. Before I could respond, my cousin Chloe bounced over, a glass of pink champagne in her hand. "Audrey, you made it," she squealed, pulling me into an awkward hug, careful not to spill her drink. She pulled back and her smile faltered as she took in my outfit. "Oh, wow, that's a look." "It's a disgrace, is what it is," Susan muttered, her grip on my arm tightening. "She looks like she's here to fix the plumbing." The area around us had grown quiet. People were starting to notice the little drama unfolding by the doorway. A few of my other cousins and uncles were looking over, their faces a mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment. This was exactly what Susan wanted, an audience for her disapproval. She turned to a small group of her friends, women with the same expensive highlights and hungry eyes as her. Her voice rose from a hiss to a stage whisper, pitched for maximum effect. "That's my sister's girl, Audrey," she said, a sigh of manufactured pity in her tone. "Bless her heart. She tries so hard, but she's had a rough go of it. Works a menial job at the hospital, you know, something with cleaning." The word cleaning hung in the air, thick and deliberate. She didn't say it to me. She said it at me for the benefit of her audience. One of her friends, a woman dripping in gold jewelry, tilted her head. "Oh, the poor thing." "Yes," Susan continued, warming to her theme. "I keep telling her there's no shame in honest work, but honestly. Showing up to your cousin's engagement party dressed like you've just been scrubbing toilets. It's just lacking in self-awareness." A ripple of condescending laughter went through the small group. I stood there, frozen in the center of their circle of scorn, my aunt's hand still clamped on my arm. Every instinct screamed at me to defend myself, to unleash the torrent of words I had rehearsed in my head for years. To tell her that my menial job involved holding human lives in my hands, that my scrubs were a badge of honor, not a mark of shame. But I held my tongue. This was not the time or the place. My plan, my quiet rebellion, required patience. It required me to absorb the blow. So I did. I let her words wash over me. I let her friends' pitying looks slide off me. I simply stood there, my expression neutral, and let her perform. Then she delivered the line from the title of this story, the one that would echo in my memory forever. She turned to her husband, my Uncle Robert, who was hovering nearby looking deeply uncomfortable, and said, loud enough for at least half the room to hear, "He cleans toilets for a living." My aunt laughed as I walked into the family reunion. "Can't believe he even showed up." She had misgendered me in her hypothetical quote, a slip that only made the insult more dehumanizing. It was as if my actual identity was so insignificant. It wasn't even worth getting the details right. The room fell into a deeply awkward silence. Even Chloe looked uncomfortable, her bubbly demeanor deflating. Uncle Robert just shook his head and walked away, wanting no part in his wife's cruelty. Finally, Susan seemed to realize she might have pushed it too far. She released my arm and patted it with false affection. "Well, you're here now. Try to stay out of the way, dear. And for heaven's sake, don't stand near the catering." With that, she turned and glided back into the heart of the party, her mission accomplished. She had established the narrative. I was Audrey, the poor, pitiable niece, the family failure. She had reinforced her own status by publicly diminishing mine. I took a shaky breath, the air feeling thick and hard to draw. My face was hot with a mixture of anger and humiliation. I wanted to turn around, walk out the door, and drive back to my sanitized, orderly life where my worth was measured in successful surgeries, not designer labels. But then I saw my grandmother again. She was still watching me from her chair, and her expression wasn't one of embarrassment. It was one of profound sadness, and a flicker of something else, disappointment. Not in me, but in her daughter, Susan. I straightened my shoulders. I would not let Susan chase me away. I had come here for my grandmother, and I would stay for my grandmother. I started walking towards her, ignoring the curious and pitying stares that followed me like a physical touch. Each step was an act of defiance. I was still standing. I was still here. The public humilia. Tian was over. But the party, I knew, was just getting started. And the most interesting guest had yet to make his entrance onto this carefully set stage. Chapter 3: The Shocking Recognition. I finally reached my grandmother's armchair, the short walk across the living room feeling like a mile-long trek through enemy territory. The whispers followed me, faint but persistent, the verbal debris of Aunt Susan's social explosion. "Audrey, my dear girl," Grandma Aliner said, her voice a comforting balm on my raw nerves. She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Her sharp, intelligent eyes scanned my face, bypassing the strange uniform entirely. "I am so glad you came." "I wouldn't have missed it, Grandma," I said, and for the first time that day, the words felt completely true. Squeezing her hand, I felt my resolve harden. Her approval was the only thing that mattered in this house. "Don't pay any mind to Susan," she murmured, leaning closer. "She measures the world with a broken ruler." I gave her a small, grateful smile and settled on the ottoman at her feet, content to remain in her orbit, a safe harbor from the rest of the party. For the next hour, we talked. I told her about the hospital, carefully editing out the grueling details but sharing the small victories, the patient who was learning to walk again, the new research paper I was co-authoring. She told me about her garden, her book club, and the latest neighborhood gossip. Her stories a gentle, familiar rhythm that slowly soothed my frayed emotions. From my vantage point, I could watch the party unfold. I saw Chloe flitting from group to group, a social butterfly in her element, her laughter bright and frequent. I saw Aunt Susan holding court, a smug, satisfied expression on her face. She had successfully put me in my place, and now she could relax, secure in her role as the matriarch of success. And then he arrived. The front door opened, and a man I assumed was Liam, the fiancé, stepped inside. He was tall and had the easy, unassuming confidence of someone who is used to being the smartest person in the room without needing to announce it. He was handsome, but it was his eyes that caught my attention. They were bright, alert, and seemed to be taking in everything at once. He was holding a sleek, minimalist gift bag. Chloe rushed to his side, greeting him with a kiss. "There you are. Everyone, this is my fiancé, Liam," she announced proudly. A fresh wave of energy went through the room as Liam was immediately swamped by well-wishers. He shook hands with uncles, accepted backpats, and charmed my aunts with a warm, genuine smile. He was, by all accounts, the perfect catch. Aunt Susan looked like she had won the lottery, beaming at him as if she had personally engineered his existence. I watched the spectacle with detached curiosity. This was the man my cousin was going to marry. He seemed kind, intelligent, a world away from the superficiality of Chloe and her mother. I wondered what he saw in them. Eventually, the crowd around him thinned, and Chloe began leading him on a tour of the remaining family members. I knew my turn was coming. I braced myself, expecting a brief, awkward handshake before he was whisked away to meet someone more important. "And over here," Chloe said, her voice artificially sweet as she guided him towards the corner where my grandmother and I were sitting. "This is my Grandma Aliner, the queen of the family. And this is my cousin Audrey. She said my name with a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation, a little flag of apology in her tone. She was warning him, this is the weird one, the charity case. Be polite and move on. Liam turned his full attention to my grandmother first, crouching down slightly to speak with her. It is an absolute honor to meet you, Mrs. Aliner, he said, his voice full of warmth and respect. Chloe has told me so much about you. My grandmother was charmed, patting his hand. The honor is all mine, young man. You take good care of my granddaughter. I will, he promised sincerely. Then he straightened up and turned to me. Our eyes met, and he extended his hand. Liam, it's a pleasure to meet you, Audrey. You too, I said, placing my hand in his. His handshake was firm, confident. And then it happened. He didn't let go. His smile froze, melting away into an expression of intense, disbelieving concentration. His eyes, which had been politely friendly a second before, were now laser-focused on my face, scanning my features as if trying to solve a complex equation. The polite chatter around us seemed to fade into a dull hum. His grip on my hand remained, not tight, but fixed. Wait a second, he whispered, his voice barely audible. He let go of my hand and took a half step back, his head tilted. He was looking at me, really looking at me, past the gray uniform and the tired expression. He was seeing something no one else in this room could see. Gears were turning in his head. I could almost see the data points connecting, the recognition dawning. His eyes widened slightly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his thumb moving quickly across the screen. Chloe watched him, her brow furrowed in confusion. Liam, what's wrong? He didn't answer her. He was staring at his phone, then back up at my face, then back at his phone. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath, drawn in by the strange, silent intensity of the moment. Aunt Susan, who had been preening nearby, drifted closer, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. And then Liam looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with utter shock and dawning reverence. He took a deep breath, and in the profound, echoing silence that had fallen over the room, his voice was crystal clear. Wait, your Dr. Ray's. The name dropped into the room like a stone into a silent pool. Dr. Ray's, not Audrey, not the poor niece, not the toilet cleaner. Doctor. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. Chloe's mouth fell open. Aunt Susan's smug smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. My uncles, my other cousins, they all stared, their minds trying to reconcile the image of the woman in the janitor's uniform with the prestigious title Liam had just bestowed upon her. I met Liam's gaze. He was looking at me with a mixture of awe and disbelief. In that moment, the power dynamic of the entire family shifted on its axis. The humiliation I had endured just an hour before evaporated, replaced by a stunning, electrifying silence. The story Susan had so carefully crafted had just been obliterated by two simple words from the one person whose opinion she valued most. And I hadn't had to say a thing. The truth had arrived, right on cue. Chapter 4: Whispers and Realizations. The silence that followed Liam's question was unlike any I had ever experienced. It wasn't empty. It was thick with unspoken questions, with the frantic whirring of 24 minds trying to process a new, impossible reality. Dr. Ray's? The title echoed in the quiet, colliding with Aunt Susan's earlier pronouncement of toilet cleaner and creating a cognitive dissonance that left everyone speechless. I was the first to break the spell. I gave Liam a small, calm smile. I go by Audrey with my family, I said, my voice steady. But yes, I'm Dr. Ray's. It's a pleasure to properly meet you, Liam. Liam looked as if he'd just met a celebrity. He quickly pocketed his phone, his whole demeanor changing from polite fiancé to starstruck admirer. Dr. Ray's, I can't believe it. I'm the CEO of a biomedical tech startup, Axon Dynamics. We're working on neural interface technology. Your work, your paper on synaptic plasticity and its application in post-trauma neurogenesis, it's foundational. It's literally the cornerstone of our next-gen project. I've read all your research. I've watched every lecture you've given that's available online. You're a legend in the field. He was gushing, his words tumbling out in a rush of genuine, unadulterated admiration. He wasn't just being polite, he was a fan, a true, professional fan. Chloe was staring at him, then at me, then back at him. Liam, what are you talking about? A legend? That's Audrey. She works at a hospital. Works at a hospital? Liam laughed, a short, incredulous sound. Chloe, your cousin isn't just a doctor. She's Dr. Audrey Reyes. She's one of the leading neurosurgeons on the East Coast. The Reyes protocol for tumor resection? That's her. People come from all over the world hoping to get a spot in her surgical rotation. He turned back to me, his eyes shining. My own company's chief medical officer has been trying to get a 30-minute consultation with you for 6 months. He said it was harder than getting a meeting with the president. Every word Liam spoke was a sledgehammer to the narrative my aunt had built. The whispers started then, a slow wave of sound rippling out from the epicenter of our conversation. Neurosurgeon, I heard an uncle murmur to his wife. Susan said she was a janitor. The Reyes protocol, I think I read about that in the news, another cousin whispered. The family was looking at me with new eyes. The pity was gone, replaced by confusion, and in some cases, dawning respect. They were seeing me for the first time, not as Susan's charity case, but as a person of substance, a person who existed powerfully and impressively outside the narrow confines of their suburban world. The most profound reaction, however, came from Aunt Susan. Her face had gone from confused to pale. The smug satisfaction was gone, replaced by a sickly, greenish tint. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her looking haggard and old. Her perfectly constructed social universe was cracking at the foundations. The star of her show, her prized future son-in-law, was fawning over the very person she had just spent an hour systematically humiliating. It was a social catastrophe of her own making. She tried to recover, forcing a brittle, high-pitched laugh. Oh, Liam, you're exaggerating. Our little Audrey, a famous surgeon? She's always been so quiet. Liam didn't seem to hear her. His focus was entirely on me. Dr. Reyes, I know this is a family event and probably the last place you want to talk shop, but the opportunity to speak with you is, wow. Would it be too forward to ask if I could steal you for 5 minutes to ask about your latest research on neural mapping? Of course, I said graciously. It was the perfect exit. It allowed me to escape the suffocating scrutiny of my family and repositioned me not as a guest to be tolerated, but as a valued expert to be consulted. As Liam and I walked towards the quieter space of the sunroom, I could feel the tectonic plates of my family's hierarchy shifting behind me. The power had transferred. I was no longer the gray smudge on the canvas. I was the focal point, the mystery everyone was desperate to solve. The conversation in the living room erupted the moment we were out of earshot. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the tone was frantic, confused. I could picture the scene perfectly, everyone turning to Susan, demanding an explanation. How could she have gotten it so wrong? Why had she lied? In the sunroom, Liam was practically vibrating with excitement. I am so sorry to ambush you like this, he said, but my team is going to lose their minds when I tell them I met you. It's no problem at all, I assured him. And please call me Audrey. We're about to be family after all. His face flushed slightly. Right, sorry, it's just you're a bit of a hero of mine. What you do is incredible. We spent the next 15 minutes talking about his company's work and my research. It was an easy, exhilarating conversation between two people passionate about their fields. He was brilliant, and his respect for my work was a balm to my soul after the abrasiveness of my aunt's scorn. When we returned to the living room, the atmosphere was completely different. The party had fractured into small, hushed groups. All eyes were on me. The looks were no longer pitying or confused. They were awestruck, curious, and in the case of Aunt Susan, deeply fearful. My cousin Chloe approached me, her usual bubbly confidence gone. She looked uncertain, as if she were meeting me for the first time. Audrey, she started, twisting a strand of her hair, I had no idea. You never said anything. You never asked, I replied gently without malice. It was true. In all the years, in all the brief, superficial conversations we'd had, she had never once asked me a meaningful question about my life or my work. She had simply accepted her mother's version of my story. Aunt Susan was watching me from across the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked like a cornered animal. Her friends, the ones who had laughed at her toilet cleaner joke, were keeping their distance from her, as if her social poison was now contagious. She had built her entire identity on a foundation of perceived status and judgment, and that foundation had just crumbled into dust. The realization of what she had done, and to whom she had done it, was slowly dawning on her face, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. The whispers had done their work. The truth was out, and now I had to decide what to do with it. Chapter 5: A Calculated Response. The rest of the party passed in a blur of surreal interactions. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly appeared at my side, offering me a drink and asking vague, clumsy questions about hospital work. Uncles who had only ever grunted in my direction now wanted to tell me about their own minor medical ailments, as if I were holding free clinical hours in my grandmother's living room. I was no longer Audrey the outcast. I was Dr. Ray's, the family's hidden gem, and everyone wanted a piece of my newfound prestige. I was polite but distant, answering their questions with the same professional courtesy I would show a stranger. I refused to let them have the satisfaction of easy intimacy after a decade of neglect. My warmth was reserved for my grandmother, who watched the proceedings with a quiet, knowing smile, and for Liam, with whom I continued to have a genuinely engaging conversation about the future of medical technology. My primary focus, however, was on Aunt Susan. She spent the remainder of the party avoiding me. She flitted around the edges of the room, her social grace shattered, her laughter sounding forced and shrill. She would occasionally shoot me a venomous, panicked look when she thought I wasn't watching. She was trapped. She couldn't apologize without admitting the depth of her lie and her cruelty, but she couldn't ignore what had happened either. Her prized future son-in-law, the symbol of her daughter's successful life, openly revered the niece she had openly mocked. The social equation was broken, and she had no idea how to solve it. I knew this couldn't end here. The public revelation was satisfying, but it was only the first step. It had corrected the misinformation, but it hadn't addressed the root of the problem, my aunt's malicious, years-long campaign to diminish me. A simple "I told you so" moment wasn't enough. I needed to ensure this never happened again, not to me, and not to anyone else she deemed less than. I needed to deliver a consequence, not just a correction. My response had to be as deliberate and precise as one of my surgeries. My opportunity came as the party began to wind down. Guests started to leave, offering their congratulations to Chloe and Liam. I made my way over to my grandmother to say goodbye. "I'm so proud of you, Audrey," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. "Not for the doctor part, though that's wonderful. I'm proud of the woman you are. You have your mother's grace and your father's strength." Her words fortified me. As I pulled away, I saw Aunt Susan hovering near the doorway, shepherding the last of her friends out. She was trying to make her escape before having to face me directly. I wasn't going to let that happen. I walked over to where Chloe and Liam were standing, accepting the last of the goodbyes. "Chloe, Liam, thank you for inviting me," I said warmly. "It was a wonderful party. Liam, I meant what I said. Have your chief medical officer email my office. I'll make time for him." Liam's face lit up. "Thank you, Audrey. That means more than you know." Chloe just nodded, still looking dazed. "Thanks for coming," she mumbled. Then, I turned my attention to the elephant in the room. Aunt Susan was pretending to be busy tidying a stack of napkins, her back to me. "Aunt Susan," I said, my voice cutting through her pretense. She froze, her shoulders stiffening. Slowly, she turned around. Her face was a carefully constructed mask of neutrality, but her eyes were filled with panic. We were standing in the middle of the room, with only my grandmother, Chloe, and Liam as our audience. the perfect, intimate stage for the final act. "Yes, Audrey," she said, her voice tight. I looked her directly in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let any anger or resentment seep into my tone. I spoke with the calm, detached authority of a surgeon delivering a diagnosis. "I heard what you said about me earlier," I began. "When I arrived, I believe the phrase you used was that I clean toilets for a living. You said it was a disgrace that I even showed up." A fresh wave of color drained from her face. Chloe looked at the floor, mortified. Liam's expression hardened as he glanced at his future mother-in-law. I don't know what you're talking about," Susan stammered, her last-ditch effort at denial sounding pathetic even to her own ears. "Don't you?" I asked, letting the question hang in the air. "You have spent the last decade and a half judging me. You judged my grief when my parents died. You judged my ambition. You judged my income, my clothes, my life choices. You constructed a narrative in which I was a failure because my success didn't look like yours. And tonight, you broadcast that narrative to anyone who would listen." I took a step closer. "Let me be very clear. Your words have consequences. Not just for me. I'm fine. My life and my career are not defined by your opinion. The consequences are for you." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Susan was trembling slightly. "You have built your life around a certain image," I continued, my voice still level and calm. "An image of success, of having the perfect family. Liam here is a big part of that image, isn't he? A successful, brilliant CEO for a son-in-law. It's a great look for you." Liam looked deeply uncomfortable but didn't interrupt. He knew this was not his fight, but he was a witness, and his presence was crucial. "Well, my work, the menial job you so despise, is deeply connected to Liam's world. The world of science, of innovation, of philanthropy. Our hospital is currently in the planning stages of a new neurotrauma wing. It's a $100 million project. We're actively courting donors, philanthropists, and corporate partners from the tech and biomedical sectors. People exactly like Liam. People who sit on boards together, who attend the same charity galas, who move in the same circles." I looked from Susan to Liam and back again. The pieces were clicking into place in her mind. I could see the dawning horror in her eyes. "You have spent years telling everyone in this family that I am nothing," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "But in the world outside this house, in the world where real power and influence reside, I am not nothing. And my menial job gives me a platform. I have a voice. I get asked to speak at conferences. I consult with people like Liam. I sit in rooms with the very people you are desperate at. To impress." I let that hang in the air for a moment. So here is my calculated response. You will apologize, not just to me. You will call every single person you lied to tonight, and you will correct the record. You will tell them you were wrong, that you spoke out of ignorance and cruelty. And then, you will never, ever speak about me or my life again unless it is with the respect that a family member deserves. Because if I ever hear that you are disparaging me again, I will not be silent. I will use my platform. And I promise you, the story of how my aunt, a suburban real estate agent, tried to humiliate her neurosurgeon niece at a party will be a far more interesting story to the people in Liam's world than any gossip you could ever spread here. It was a checkmate. I had used her own values, image, status, and the opinion of powerful people against her. I had laid out, in cold, hard terms, the catastrophic social consequences she would face if she ever crossed me again. I had taken the power she tried to strip from me and showed her what it could really do. She stared at me, speechless. Her mask was gone. All that was left was a terrified, defeated woman who had just realized she picked a fight with a dragon, mistakenly believing it was a lizard. The choice was hers. Chapter 6, The Unveiling. Aunt Susan stood frozen, her mind visibly struggling to process the ultimatum I had laid before her. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Chloe looked from me to her mother, her face pale with second-hand shame. Liam's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on Susan, waiting. My grandmother, from her armchair, watched with a somber intensity. This was more than a family squabble. It was an unveiling, a moment where the true character of everyone in the room was being laid bare. Finally, Susan's composure cracked. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight went out of her eyes, replaced by a desperate, panicked scramble for self-preservation. She knew I had her cornered. The threat wasn't just about social embarrassment. It was about the potential destruction of the very world she had so carefully built. The thought of Liam recounting this story to his influential peers, the story of his fiancée's petty, cruel mother, was a nightmare she couldn't fathom. "Audrey," she began, her voice a raw, shaky whisper. It was the first time she had ever sounded small. I'm sorry." The words sounded foreign coming from her lips, rusty from disuse. "Sorry for what specifically?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. I would not let her get away with a vague, meaningless apology. She needed to own her actions. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting towards Liam, then back to me. "I'm sorry for what I said. When you arrived, it was inappropriate." "It was more than inappropriate, Aunt Susan," I said, keeping the pressure on. "It was a lie, and it was cruel. You did it to deliberately humiliate me in front of our entire family. Say it." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of frustration and humiliation, not remorse, but it didn't matter. The outcome was the same. "It was a lie," she choked out, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "And it was cruel. I did it to humiliate you." It was a stunning admission. Chloe let out a small gasp. "Thank you," I said, my tone clinical. "Now for the second part. You will call your friends and our family, and you will correct the record. You will tell them the truth about my profession, and you will admit that you lied. Am I understood?" She nodded numbly, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Yes." "Good," I said. My part in this was done. The surgical strike was complete. I had excised the toxic behavior with precision, leaving no room for ambiguity. I turned to leave, but Liam's voice stopped me. "Susan," he said, and the coldness in his tone made her flinch. It was the first time he had directly addressed her since the confrontation began. She looked up at him, her expression pleading. He was the prize she was terrified of losing. "Chloe and I are going to need to have a very serious conversation about this," he said, his voice low and steady. "About the kind of family we want to build, about the values we want to uphold. What you did tonight, it's not something I can just ignore." His words were a clear and devastating blow. He wasn't just disappointed. He was fundamentally questioning his future with a family that harbored this kind of toxicity. He looked at Chloe, and for the first time, she seemed to understand the true gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about her mother embarrassing her cousin. It was about her mother potentially poisoning her future happiness. Chloe finally found her voice. "Mom," she said, her tone trembling but firm, "Liam is right. What you did was horrible. I was so embarrassed. Not of Audrey, of you." This, more than anything I had said, seemed to end a final, crushing blow on Susan. Her own daughter, her perfect creation, was siding against her. The unveiling was complete. Susan was no longer the powerful matriarch. She was an exposed bully, ostracized by her own family and her coveted son-in-law. I didn't need to stay and watch the fallout. I had accomplished what I set out to do. I gave a final, warm smile to my grandmother, who nodded at me with tears of pride in her eyes. I gave a slight, acknowledging nod to Liam, a silent thank you for his unwitting role in this drama. Then I turned and walked out the front door, leaving the fractured remains of the party behind me. As I walked to my car, the cool night air felt clean and fresh. I didn't feel triumphant or gleeful. I just felt quiet. I had stood up for myself, not with anger or hysterics, but with calm, undeniable truth. I had used my own success, the very thing Susan had always resented, as a shield and a sword. Driving back to the city, I felt a profound sense of closure. It wasn't just about one party or one insult. It was about closing a painful chapter of my life that had been defined by the judgment of others. I had spent so long building a life away from that judgment, and tonight, I had proven to myself that I was no longer the scared, grieving 18-year-old girl who could be wounded by her aunt's careless cruelty. I was Dr. Audrey Reyes. I had a life of purpose, a career that saved lives, and a future that I controlled. I didn't need their approval, I never had. But by forcing them to confront the truth, I had finally reclaimed my own narrative within the family. Whatever happened next, whether Susan made those calls, whether Chloe and Liam stayed together, was their story to write. I was finally, completely, free to continue with mine. The ghost of my aunt's disapproval had been well and truly exorcised. Chapter 7. A New Family Portrait. The week after the party was one of the quietest I'd had in a long time. There were no frantic texts from Chloe, no guilt-inducing calls from my grandmother, no communication from my extended family whatsoever. It was a strange, unnerving silence, the kind that follows a massive storm. I threw myself into my work, performing a complex spinal fusion and overseeing the recovery of my glioblastoma patient. In the sterile, high-stakes world of the operating room, I was in control. The messy, emotional chaos of my family felt a world away. The first ripple from the party reached me the following Friday. It was an email from a name I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "Following up on my conversation with Liam." It was from Dr. Alastair Finch, the Chief Medical Officer of Axon Dynamics. He formally requested a consultation, citing Liam's glowing recommendation after meeting me at a family function. I smiled. Liam had been true to his word. The professional world was moving on, completely oblivious to the personal drama that had enabled this connection. I had my assistant schedule the meeting. The personal fallout arrived the next day, on Saturday morning. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello. Audrey, it's your Uncle Robert." I was taken aback. My Uncle Robert, Susan's husband, had never called me in my life. He was a quiet, passive man who had always existed in the background of his wife's loud, domineering personality. "Uncle Robert," I said, my voice cautious, "is everything okay?" There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "I don't know, Audrey. I wanted to call and apologize for Susan, for myself. For all the years I just stood by and let her treat you that way. I was a coward. What you did at that party. You were brave. You have more strength in your little finger than she has in her whole body. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you." His words, so simple and sincere, affected me more than the entire dramatic confrontation had. "Thank you, Uncle Robert," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot to me." "Susan, she's not doing well," he continued, his voice heavy. "She made the calls, every single one. It was the most humiliating experience of her life. Some of her friends have stopped speaking to her. They saw her for what she is. And Chloe, she and Liam are in counseling. Liam hasn't walked away, but he's made it clear that things have to change. Drastically, he won't have his future children exposed to that kind of poison." It was a stark, unvarnished update. The consequences had been real and devastating for Susan. A part of me should have felt a sense of satisfaction, of victory, but I just felt a quiet sadness for the wreckage she had created. The final piece of the story came a month later in the form of a handwritten letter. The envelope was addressed in my grandmother's elegant, familiar script. Inside was a letter, and tucked behind it was a photograph. I read the letter first. "My dearest Audrey, I hope this letter finds you well. Things here have been different, quieter. The storm has passed, and we are all left to rebuild in its wake. Your Uncle Robert has started speaking up for himself. It is remarkable to see. Chloe is learning to define her own values, separate from her mother's. It is a difficult journey for her, but a necessary one. As for Susan, she is learning a hard lesson in humility. I do not know if her heart will ever truly change, but her actions have. That is a start. I know what you did was not for revenge, my dear. It was for truth. You brought a necessary, painful truth into the light, and you did it with a surgeon's precision. You did not burn the house down, you simply opened all the windows and let the fresh air in. Some of us are breathing easier for it. I am enclosing a photograph. It was taken last weekend. It is the first new picture I have put on my mantelpiece in a very long time. All my love. Grandma Aliner. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the photograph. It was of my grandmother, sitting in her armchair. Standing behind her were my Uncle Robert, Chloe, and Liam. They were smiling, but it wasn't the bright, performative smile of the party. It was a more subdued, more genuine expression. To one side of the chair stood me, my arm resting on my grandmother's shoulder. I had no memory of this picture being taken, and then I realized it was a composite. My grandmother, or perhaps Chloe, had skillfully photoshopped a recent picture of me, one from the hospital's website where I was smiling in my lab coat, into their new family portrait. Aunt Susan was notably absent from the picture. It wasn't a perfect family. It was fractured, wounded, and in the process of a painful recalibration. But in that photoshopped image, I saw a new reality. I was no longer the outcast. I was a part of the picture, on my own terms.